Hey brother, what's up? It is currently the 4th of October, the year of the Lord 2016, and today is Technology Tuesday, where I'm going to go over something technological about the game. So today I thought I would go over some of the more, shall we say, mundane parts of the game, kind of the plumbing that helps, not part of the game itself, so I guess plumbing isn't an apt analogy, but sort of the scaffolding, if you will, that which helps create the game. So there's several tools that I'm using. One is called Gradle. I've mentioned it several times, and I incorporated two new ones yesterday that I want to show off that allow me to use the TexturePacker and the AssetManager. Fun little tools. So I'm going to go over and switch to the screen here and open up the Android Studio, and I'm going to go over to my project browser here and try and shrink everything so that you can see it on one screen. We'll see if I'm successful. There we go. So you'll notice that I've got a lot of files, certainly more than you would have in your C++, maybe as many as you would have with Unity if you actually dive into all the files that are there on the hard drive. I had a professor once who told me that nothing should be magic when it comes to programming, meaning that all of these files, these directories, you should know what they do. You should be willing to delete any file at any moment, unless or state a concrete reason why not to. And so I know what most of these files do, and by the time we're done, you'll know at least a few of them. But what I want to focus on are these Gradle files. So Gradle is a tool that we use to help build our game. So as you well know, Java or C# or C++ is sort of a compromise between the computer's native language, which is binary, and ours, which is English. And we use a compiler to translate from that language into the binary, and then the computer can run our program. Well, when you've got a simple program like a little hello world with a few files, this is really simple. One file goes in, one file comes out. When you start creating a project that spans many files and starts including other libraries, not all of which you created, things start getting more and more complex. So we have some tools to help us deal with that. For C++, I believe it's something called make-C, or something along those lines. For Java, we have three tools. One is called Ant, one is called Maven, and the third is called Gradle. And I'm only going to focus on Gradle because that's the cool one. So Gradle, I'm actually opening up I've got the file open here. This is a Gradle file, and it tells, it's basically a set of instructions for how to put the game together. Now, Gradle is written in a language called Groovy, which is the Java version of Ruby. We looked at the syntax and said, oh, that's cool, and so we built Groovy. And so this is really a small piece of code. And it looks a little cryptic at first, but I'll break it down. So one of the problems we run into as programmers is that we can't code everything on our own as much as we'd like to. Eventually you're going to have to use someone else's code, and that's going to come in a library. And people keep updating their libraries, which is awesome, but it means their libraries start getting out of date. And or the copy that you have starts becoming out of date, and so you want to get the new one. Or you may want to, not keep a local copy of it, or at least not manage those local copies yourself. You may want to say, hey, instead of building my own bookshelf at home, I'll go to a library, pick out some books, and when I'm done with them, I'll return them. It's a little bit closer to that. So what we came up with was a website called Maven, and a tool for interacting with it. And what that Maven does is it manages dependencies. That is, the pieces of code, other people's libraries and code that my project needs to work. So what my Gradle script is doing is it's actually using Maven to say, hey, I want to make sure that this is the repository or website that contains all the libraries. This is the one I'm interested in. And then I've got a section called Dependencies where I say, hey, these are the libraries that I'm dependent on. And so I've got, for example, the Gradle plugin. And these, by the way, are dependencies that I believe the Gradle script itself is dependent on. We'll see more library dependencies later for the actual code. But this is basically saying I'm dependent on the Gradle plugin for Google Web Toolkit, which is the way that I deploy this to HTML. That's the Java to JavaScript translator thingy. I'm dependent on having the Android tools component, and this is what allows me to push it to Android, and then GDX tools, which I'll walk through in a moment. This goes on to define a set of projects which are reflected here, and this is just a nice way of splitting the code so I can keep the Android stuff separate from the web stuff, keep it all separate from the core stuff and the desktop stuff, keep all my stuff in the right buckets. We also have just a little properties setting here where we say, okay, this is the name of the app, here are the different version numbers, because down here we have, where we define the projects, we have the different libraries we will need to compile, the different dependencies we have. And so these range from like the different backends and core libraries. I'm not using too many dependencies because this game is, it just doesn't need a whole lot. But in here I've got things like QE, which gives me my logger. I've got Viz UI, which paints all that lovely UI stuff that you've seen in the demos, and so on. So each Gradle script allows me to run some commands to compile my code and run it without an IDE. So I don't really need Android Studio. I can just use Gradle to do everything, which is cool because I may not always have Android Studio, but my Gradle files are included with my code on GitHub. So you can literally clone the GitHub directory, and as long as you have the Java development kit installed, I believe you can just run it as it is, and it'll download what it needs in order to work. So all of that saying is I've got, that was a lot, and it's just all to say I've got a bunch of scripts that allow me to build my game. Now I went ahead and made an addition to one of the scripts under desktop, because desktop's where I do my development, so it made sense. And you'll see I've got a build.gradle script here, and what I added was a TexturePacker. Now what a TexturePacker is it's a program that will go and take a bunch of small textures, and it will make them all part of a larger file or set of files. And the reason why is because I believe it's just more efficient. You get to pass the individual large files to the graphics card, and then you just tell the graphics card, okay, these are the little pieces that I want to use. I don't have that many graphics, so it's probably not a performance issue. I probably wouldn't have to have it for that reason. But the benefit of this is it creates something called an atlas, which allows me, and this atlas allows me to basically load all of my files, all my images at once. It makes loading a lot simpler for the game. So what I've done, and again this is really busy, I'm just going to highlight the interesting parts, is I import the TexturePacker. This is actually a Java class, but Groovy is awesome in that I can run my Java code from Groovy. I then store a list of commands that I'm going to give to my TexturePacker, and this says, hey, this is where you can find the unpacked goods, in this case all of the item pictures that I've created. I've got them in one folder. this is where I want you to put the atlas when you're done and name it goods. And I've got the same thing for merchants and UI. So now if I go to the bottom, I've got a task here, which is weird syntax aside. It basically says if I've got, it's called TexturePacker, and it says if I have settings under TexturePacker, and we do, that's where we stored all of these parameters here. It says go ahead and loop through them and have the TexturePacker pack each one. And in fact, I'm going to do that right now. So I've got a little terminal below as part of Android Studio. This is, I love having this. It's really nice to use. I'm going to run Gradle W, which is a program. It's basically a Gradle, it stands for Gradle wrapper, and it allows you to run Gradle without actually installing it on your computer. And that's what allows you to pull this from GitHub and run Gradle without installing it. So I'm going to say Gradle W, and then I'm going to say TexturePacker. And this is going to go and run the TexturePacker task. And you can see that it is it's packing and writing different files to disk. An interesting thing is to see is that these are all in powers of 2. Each dimension is at least, and that's because graphics cards really like powers of 2. They like binary, and binary, of course, is powers of 2. So it went ahead and packed. So if I go to my Android folder and assets, I can go to images, and I've got these different files. So I'm going to go ahead and open up goods, and this gives an example. You can see, whoa, it went and it took all my goods images, and it gave them a little bit of a border just so that they don't bleed over onto each other, and then it put as many as it could fit inside this file. All right? Now, there's a corresponding atlas file, and this is sort of our guide to the image in the same way that an atlas is your guide to the world. And so this says, okay, the file name is goods.png, this is its size, this is the format, how you want to represent those images in memory. There's a filter. This is used to, if we want to scale the images, this is kind of how we do that. We don't need to repeat, and then it walks through each image, and it says, you know, it doesn't need to be rotated, and none of mine do. They're all squares, so rotating them doesn't really help. And then it says this is the XY coordinates to find at, this is the size, and this allows, these set of instructions allow us to kind of take a cookie cutter approach later and punch out the images later from the big image. So this is the description. Notice that there were so many, couldn't fit it on one 2048 by 2048 page, and so it's got multiple pages of images. And again, this is to make things efficient, but it also allows me to essentially load everything with a single command, which is cool. Or at least I can load all my goods with a single command. And really, I could have combined goods, merchants, and the UI onto a single set of pages, and I decided to keep them separate for now. Maybe I'll change that in the future, but you know, currently that's the way it is. So I'm going to go ahead and close this and show how this gets loaded in my code. So if I go over to the core library where all the interesting stuff is, as part of my game, I created something called an asset manager, and this is the third thing I said I'd talk about. The asset manager is a class that manages my assets. Basically, it keeps track of all the images that I load, and it also works for music and sound as well. I don't have any yet, but at some point I will. And the asset manager is cool because it not just loads these things from disk, but it can do that kind of in the background. And so you can start loading, and then you can display a loading screen, and that bar gets populated as your asset manager continues to load stuff that's been asked to load. So again, that's not a great use of my time right now, especially because I don't have enough resources for it to really notice, for you to notice that lag. But and once I do, I can create a loading page using this. So I tell it to load each of the atlases. The atlas contains the instructions to find the actual image files. So you notice I just have to load the atlas file and I'm done. And then by passing it this texture atlas class, that tells me what sort of file it's trying to load. Because again, this could load just raw textures. It could load music or sound effects, or something more complicated like an atlas, or even a custom thing. You can write your own loaders for the Asset Manager, and I may at some point do that, for like the levels or something. So this Asset Manager loads the files, and it does more with them. It actually, so when you load, imagine you've got to display like 100 tiles, right? A 10 by 10 grid of tiles in a game. If you go and put your loading in, if you just have a loop that goes through each tile and says, okay, I need grass, I need dirt, I need rocks, I need, chocolate mousse, whatever, and you go and say, okay, load that image from disk. You're going to load that image from disk a bunch of times. It's going to be really inefficient, and it's going to take a while because typically speaking, hitting the disk takes longer than accessing something in memory. The Asset Manager, if I use the Asset Manager, it's a little bit smarter than that. It says, okay, well, if you ask me 2 times for the same thing, I'm just going to give you that thing that I already loaded. I'm going to keep track of everything you asked me to load, and if you ask for it again, I'm just going to give it to you again. And that's, you don't have to, and that way it's a little bit more efficient. It also keeps track, it's supposed to keep track of how many times that resource is being used and whether it's depended upon by other resources. I don't fully understand how that works. I want to go through the guts of Asset Manager at someday and learn that. But it does a lot of fancy asset management stuff that would be a pain to code on my own. So this is kind of cool. I'm sure Unity has something similar, or it's built in and hidden behind the scenes, especially since so much is done through that editor. But this is really important for games of scale. And so I figured, I wanted to remove the places throughout my code where I was just loading things from disk, because for one thing, that's always a place where the game could break. If that file is not there when we need it, I would rather know when the game starts up and get it all done at once than later on. And of course, this is also a little bit more efficient because I'm doing all my loading up front, where the player might expect to see a loading screen instead of while they're playing, which could cause it to lag. So yeah, those are the 3 tools. I know I've gone through them super fast and at a really high level, but Gradle, TexturePacker, and Asset Manager. And the first one is just a general Java tool that I highly recommend you learn if you learn Java. The other 2 are part of libgdx, but the concepts apply to other languages and game engines. So yeah, that's what I had. Tomorrow should be Windback Wednesday. We might do a little bit of refactoring, clean up some to-do items, and I'll see you then. So until next time.